there's a lot of excitement in this room. It's taken me 5 minutes to get the speaker in here. All of y'all keep stopping him to talk to him. So I want to acknowledge our speaker today. Thank you for being here, R.J. Scaringe, CEO of Rivian, and our moderator, Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for being here. So I invite William Pate to the podium to deliver the invocation and to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, creator of all things, we come to you today in a spirit of thanksgiving. Thank you for this gathering of leaders of our great city. Thank you for the blessings that you've laid upon our city. And may your hand guide our elected officials to make decisions to the benefit of all of our citizens. We are so richly blessed. Let us always remember to lift up those who are not as fortunate, especially as we enter this season of giving. Bless this wonderful meal we're about to enjoy and the hands that prepared it, and keep everyone safe and healthy this holiday season. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, William. So at this point, you all may be seated, enjoy your lunch, and go back to the frenzy with Mr. Scaringe. Before we move on with our program, I'd like to ask if there are any visitors in this room, and if there are, would you please stand? Thank you all for being with us today. Are there any visiting Rotarians in the room today? Okay, thank you. I now invite Chris Clark to the podium to introduce our speaker and to begin our program.
Good afternoon. That's pitiful. Try again. Good afternoon. Thank y'all for coming out today. I'm happy to have the CEO of Rivian, R.J. Scaringe, with us today. R.J. founded the company in 2009 as Mainstream Motors. He's, I can't even pronounce it. I tried, R.J. I'm going to try it again. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Okay, that's my southern accent. That's as good as that's going to get. He's also got his master's and PhD from MIT, where he focused on powertrain and lean manufacturing. He was originally born down in Rockledge, Florida, and has been an entrepreneur since childhood. And we're so excited, RJ, about your investment in the state of Georgia, and excited to have a conversation with you today. So y'all please give a good Rotary welcome to RJ. Come on up. You've had a busy day, haven't you?
Yeah.
Welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I do want to spend some time today talking about the vehicles and the company and all that fun stuff. But first, listen, in the South, people really like to know each other, right? This is a relationship community. And so tell us just a little bit about growing up. It said that you were an entrepreneur from early on. So I'm curious about how you got that bug and what that looked like as a kid growing up.
Well, I grew up a huge car enthusiast. So since my earliest memories, I was in love with cars, loved working on them, and realized probably by about the age 10 that I wanted to start a car company. And I remember, I have kids. I have 3 boys, and my oldest is 9. So it was at about the age that I can remember thinking to myself, I want to start a car company. And so when I now look at my son and I imagine myself going to my dad, and I remember saying to my dad, hey Dad, I want to start a car company. And my dad said, that's a really good idea. You should totally do it. And I'm like, it actually inspires me in terms of how I think about being a parent, because it was his early support of what seemed like probably a crazy, idea as a kid that helped me really find my way. So I started working in essentially anything that would help me learn how to build vehicles. So I worked in a machine shop as an apprentice machinist. I worked in a restoration shop restoring classic Porsches, like old, for any classic car fans, old 356s. And ultimately decided to go to school, went to Rensselaer Polytechnic. This is where my dad went as well. I did my undergrad there and then went on to do a master's and PhD. And, it's really interesting when you look at building something like a car company. It requires a lot of capital, and it requires a very, very large team of engineers, and in the beginning, you have none of those things. So you need lots of capital, large team, a brand that customers are going to care about, a product that's desirable. And so a big part of starting a car company is having enough money before you get started. So you need capital to develop the technology, and then ultimately you need technology to raise the capital. And so my simple logic when I went for my PhD was, if I need to raise a lot of money, it's more likely that someone's going to invest in me and this business if I have some semblance of credibility. And so that was the idea. And so my dad supported me, was an enthusiastic cheerleader along the way.
It's amazing. Half the people in this room still don't know what they want to do with their lives. And at 10, you had figured it out. So I'm curious. So when you started Mainstream, right? What was did I get the title right in 2009?
Yeah. So what was the idea? It's when you start something like this and you're dreaming about it from when you're a kid, the idea had many different versions. And so I remember when I was a kid, I imagined my idea of starting a car company was this cool old brick building. I'd be in there building cars. And as I got older and understood the business a bit more, I realized it was probably going to be more than just a cool old brick building and me building cars. And the scale of a business like this is something that as you pull the thread on it, becomes more and more obvious just why it's so hard to start something like this, why we so rarely see new car companies. But a very early decision I made, even before I started the company, was a desire to vertically integrate technology. And so I've always been really interested in technology and went to school for it. So from the very beginning, there were certain things we said we're going to do. And so in 2009, I remember we raised our first small amount of outside capital. And I remember the first meeting we had with our investors. And I said, well, we're going to develop all the electronics, all the software, in the vehicle. And they looked at me like, well, why don't you try to buy some of that? And I said, well, that's going to be really important, trust me, in the end. And make a very long story short, after lots and lots of debate and a lot of iterations, that's turned out to be really true. Now, what the vehicle was, we started with the idea of it being a sports car. It evolved many times, ultimately became what you now see today, which is a brand really built around both enabling but also inspiring adventure. And so we started with a flagship product, the R1S, the R1T. And of course, as some of you know, hopefully all of you know, we're about to launch something we call R2, which is a much more affordable product. It's a 5-passenger, 2-row SUV. But that takes this idea that was embodied in the flagship products of adventure and enabling it and condenses it into a much smaller package at a much lower price point.
So I want to come back to the R2. In 2009, when you started the company, was it an electric car company at the time?
Well, it was, you'll laugh. In 2009, it wasn't clear whether it was going to be electric, a hybrid, or a pedal hybrid. So it was very...
Okay.
Very academic, very broad. And so we narrowed in on a sports car. Then we narrowed in, initially we thought it'd be hybrid, and then pretty quickly we realized it was going to be fully electric and transitioned to SUVs and more adventure-oriented vehicles, yeah. But it was lots. I mean, one of the things I say all the time with new companies is, and I now have a lot of friends and people I've advised in starting businesses, is you need to be really clear on what the big mission is, but the tactics, like the tactic of what the product is, even what the technology is going to be, you need to have a fairly high degree of flexibility because you're going to learn things, the markets are going to evolve, And so I was really clear that I wanted to build something that had meaning and had impact in automotive. But we were quite flexible on what that meant as we then went about doing the work to discover and to understand where we saw market need and where we saw an opportunity to innovate with technology.
Right. All right, so here's the big question everybody's trying to figure out. Are you a technology company or an automotive company? Or are you something new?
I think in the future, to me, it's I say this a lot. I would characterize it as, I would say it's inconceivable that in 10 to 15 years that any car company can operate at scale and maintain the market share that they've historically had if they're not building software-defined vehicles, so vehicles that have technology deeply integrated into the way that they operate. And every car on the road today has some level of software, but most of them, I'd say with the exception of Rivian and Tesla, really aren't software defined. The architectures are pretty sloppy. They weren't architected around electronics. They weren't architected to simplify the operating system within the vehicle. And so as we now think about AI entering into the experience, and so that's both what you may interact with in vehicle, to the vehicle driving itself, to importantly, the ecosystem that surrounds the vehicle, knowing what needs to happen. So the idea of like you calling a service department to say something's not working is going to be something we all remember, but like my kids won't even understand why you would ever call a service department. The car will do that for you. It will know what's wrong with itself and it will communicate it. And so just the degree to which AI will start to really completely shift how we think about the vehicle, the interaction with the vehicle, the way the vehicle operates, the way the business operates to support the vehicle, is really profound. And we're going to witness that over the next decade. You call it next decade or two. And so I think it's a necessity to exist at scale, to be absolutely a technology company that builds cars. And I think every company is going to go through that journey. And I've said this a few times, but I think every company has three choices right now. They could either develop software and electronics as a core competency internally. They could license that from a company that has that capability. We did a $5.8 billion software licensing deal with Volkswagen Group, who's the second largest car company in the world, last year. Or they could do neither of those two and accept that they will shrink. And the third choice of doing nothing, it is absolutely an implicit choice to shrink. And so I think you're going to see a lot of companies either develop new big arms of technology or try to find ways to get that technology through partnerships or through licensing.
So tell us about that partnership with VW, because that was huge news. Legacy car company that did have a lot of trouble and hasn't been able to keep up on the software side and their user interface. So how did that deal come about, and what does that mean, for Volkswagen, and then what does it mean for Rivian?
Yeah, actually, it's great that we talk about it here. So one of the first meetings we had was in Atlanta. It was at Porsche's office here. And so I'm a lifelong Porsche fan, and we had started having discussions with Porsche on helping them in essentially driving their technology platform forward and rethinking how you look at everything from a digital interface to chassis controls to powertrain controls, all the things that are controlled with computers today. And as we started to make a lot of progress with the Porsche team, the overall group, so Volkswagen Group owns Porsche, said, hey, wait a second, if we're going to deploy this in Porsche, why are we not deploying this across everything? So it quickly led to this aha moment to say, let's really go big and let's deploy Rivian's technology across the full Volkswagen Group of brands, which includes Audi, Porsche, a handful of brands that aren't sold here in the United States, brands like Seat or Cupra or Skoda. And it took a while to put that deal together. It's a big deal. It's a complex deal. To have a company of that scale, it's the largest industrial company in Europe. To build like deep structural technical dependency on a small U.S. company, it's unprecedented. And certainly it was the largest software licensing deal in the history of the auto industry. So it was a really unique deal. But it was forged, not far from here, which is pretty wild.
So your software will be in their vehicles starting in 2027, 28?
Yeah. So the first car our technology will be in something called an ID1. It won't be sold in the United States. It's a super cool car. It's a $22,000 EV electric vehicle for Europe, and it's really designed. It's really embracing our technology, which I can describe in a moment, but it's designed to compete with Chinese players, which we won't really see for a lot of reasons here in the United States, but in Europe, you're absolutely seeing them.
Okay. So let's, I want to switch gears a little bit. You brought up the R2 a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about that, and then the R3 is coming after that, right? So tell us about what the play is for those two brands, or those two models.
Yeah, so R2 takes, well, actually, before I get to R2, let me talk about R1. So we launched R1 at the end of 2021, and so many learnings. I mean, like I could list for pages and pages of things we learned launching that, but we launched our first product, which was actually the first thing we built was the R1T. Simultaneous to that, we then launched, like days later, our SUV, the R1S. And then a few days after that, we launched a commercial van. And so if you see any electric commercial vans operated by Amazon, those are vans that we designed and built. And so lesson number one is, if you're launching your first really, really complex product, don't launch three of them at the same time. So we launched three things at the same time, and that was just in and of itself complex. Overlaid on top of that, we were launching in the middle of a global pandemic, which today seems like a distant memory, but it was only a few years ago that it was very, very hard to have teams work together in person, which is okay if you're a pure software company, but if you're a software company that makes cars, it's really hard. And then we had a big supply chain crisis in 2022. And so if you imagine a vehicle, it has, call it 30 to 35,000 discrete components in it across the tiers of supply. And we had, for the first time, been ramping the supply chain, so we were like last in line to get components from a lot of our suppliers. So it was very, very hard to just get enough parts. And we ended up in a very tough situation where we had to pay significant premiums just to get supply. But despite all those operational challenges, which we certainly felt financially, the product really resonated in a beautiful way with customers. And I remember in you're talking 2009, and we went through lots of iterations, but by the time we started to really center on what the brand wanted to become, it was like 2017, 2018. And we would have these big brand debates and discussions with our design team, myself, and we'd end up with these storyboards that would imagine like a what-if scenario. What if the brand can accomplish this? And we had these dreams of a brand that would both be highly functional, but one that actually, as I said before, inspired people to go do the kinds of things you'd want to take photographs of, or the kinds of things you want to remember for decades. And so whether that's taking your kids to the beach, or a telescope out to a field, or a camping trip for a weekend, like that was the idea. And I said, maybe someday if we do this really well, like people will be proud to own a Rivian, and maybe even someone making a Rivian tattoo. I remember saying that. And so we launched, and very quickly the product connected. The product market fit was outstanding. The brand hypothesis, or the brand thesis around positioning, really connected. In our first year of production with our first vehicle, both Consumer Reports and J.D. Power do an annual brand survey of owner satisfaction and likelihood to repurchase. We came out number one in both of those by not just like a point or two, but by 10 points. We're 10 points higher than the next closest brand. As a brand new car company, first product, highest level of customer satisfaction, highest rate of repurchase. And we also had a few people email me with pictures of Rivian tattoos, which was really cool. In our second year, highest brand satisfaction. Third year, last year, same thing. And as it stands today, the R1S is the best-selling premium electric SUV in the country. So it depends on how you draw the boundary diagrams in this, but assuming you draw them as SUVs priced over $70,000, we have about 35% market share. And uniquely in the state of California and Washington, we're the best-selling premium SUV, electric or non-electric. So if you guys go to California, you will see a lot of Rivians. It's the most frequent purchase of a premium SUV in the state of California. But by virtue of the price being high, so the average selling price of an R1 today is over $90,000, just the size of the market naturally is more limited, and that was, of course, the intent, launch the brand with a flagship product, and then bring in more mass market product following that. And so that is R2. R2 takes a lot of the elements that connected well in R1, puts them into a mid-size platform, mid-size vehicle, and with a price point that starts at about half of the average price of an R1. So it starts at $45,000. And the R2 has a sibling product, which we call R3, really creative naming team. And the R3 is more of a crossover, and we haven't announced the pricing on it, but the pricing on R3 will be even lower than quite a bit lower, I should say notably lower than R2. And the objective for those is just to make the brand experience of Rivian available to a lot more people. And the technology, the product, the way we make trade-offs around product features available to a lot more people. And of course, to do that, a lot of technology has been developed over the last couple of years to go into them.
And to do that, you need another manufacturing facility.
Yeah, to do that at scale.
Yeah, to do it. So I do want to switch gears and talk about the Georgia project. I know Pat Wilson's here, and Debbie and Sarah and Katie in the back, all kind of folks in the economic development chamber world that helped with the project. Tell us a little bit about why Georgia and what that process was like, and what really made the difference of why this was the right place to make that huge investment.
Well, I'll come to that. It's probably worth noting, even the nature of questions worth doubling down on. So one of the unique things about automotive production, and in particular in our case, automotive production where you vertically integrated a lot of technology, is scale is really important. And to run a business like this, you have enormous fixed costs. They're large for any type of auto business. They become even larger if you make the decision to vertically integrate in a lot of domains. And we made the decision to vertically integrate on all of our technology. So we don't use traditional automotive suppliers like Bosch or Continental to make any of the electronics. We design and build them ourselves. Electric drivetrains, inverters, power electronics, everything is done in-house. We also don't sell through traditional dealers. We sell direct, so we're direct-to-consumer brand, which means we need to build out service and sales infrastructure. And those were very intentional and conscious decisions that require many, many, many billions of dollars to either build the infrastructure and the teams to support the infrastructure, or to build the technology. And in the beginning, the volume doesn't support that fixed cost structure. And so it's a fancy way of me saying we lose money. But once you accumulate enough scale, those things that are structural cost disadvantages become enormous structural cost advantages, because you take big layers of cost out of the business, and you can then absorb the fixed cost of vertically integrating it across more volume. And so, it's my way of introducing why we need more volume here. And so in designing R2 and R3, we wanted platforms or products, if you will, product families that had the potential to garner and generate enough demand to substantially exceed the level of volume we need to cover all those fixed costs and to become a business that generates a lot of free cash flow. And so the first step to that is we're launching R2 out of our existing facility in Illinois. And that will have a capacity for R2 of close to 160,000 units. The plant that we're building here will have a capacity through the first two phases of 400,000 units, with the potential to grow further beyond that. And so Georgia is it's like the most critical part of the long-term trajectory to become a very strong cash-producing business that will then obviously fund the flywheel for further technology development, further growth, further investment. And so with the process of making the decision as to where we're going to put this very large investment, that's not a 1 or 2 year investment, but it's a generational investment that we're making as a company. It's an asset that will be in the business for a very, very long time. We spent a lot of time on that. If it's not clear, it's like that's what will ultimately fuel the growth and the profitability of the business. It's something that we're going to continue to invest in over time. And so we looked across the country, and we had a few really core criteria, things you'd expect: access to a talented workforce, logistically optimal in terms of suppliers. I met a supplier of ours just as I was sitting down to dinner or to lunch. But beyond that, there's some intangible things that are really hard to measure, and they're the kinds of things that you can sort of pick up on once you're in operation in a area, but they're hard to sense before you're there. And it's around like the energy or the enthusiasm to create or to build or to innovate. Some places have long-standing reputations for this. Silicon Valley, where we have thousands of engineers, has a long-standing reputation of being innovative and disrupting. But in the world of thinking about a business that could be manufacturing and innovation together, that was a harder question. And so I spent a lot of time talking to CEOs or operators of businesses that were here in the state of Georgia, and then specifically folks that were here in the greater Atlanta area. And over again, heard just beyond the obvious things we can measure, things like Georgia Tech and some of the academic programs that exist here, just the vibrant nature of the community that's here. And so as we pulled the thread on that, we just became more and more enthused around that. And ultimately, the decision was based on that. It was based upon the belief, the deeply held belief we had that the business is going to win based upon the people we can recruit. And we think that being in Georgia and being in the greater Atlanta area is going to position us in the best way possible to recruit both people from this area, but also pull people into this area.
So tell us a little bit about your vision for the East Coast headquarters facility here.
So it links to the last question. So another ideal outcome we were hoping to achieve was in our scaled plant, that we would be able to co-locate in close proximity to it technology and corporate office that's covering everything from AI in the business, AI in the products, to thinking about designing the back ends for how we run this large-scale business. And there are a number of places that are great for manufacturing, but would be very hard to recruit for in terms of the technology teams. This site in Georgia was unique in that it would allow us to have both. And so we made the decision on the plant. We hoped, fingers crossed, we'd be able to complete the second part of that, which is to put our East Coast headquarters here as well. And we recently announced that. We now have this awesome spot right on the Beltline. And so we had an all-team get-together there. And a bunch of our team from California were like, man, this is really nice. We don't have this in the Bay Area. And it was sort of funny. We're all like, so who's moving?
And that's why we're the best place to do business 12 years in a row, right, Pat?
Jokes aside, that's an important point. Again, if you're in the business of talent, which we all are, being able to recruit people, not only that are from here, but that come here and say, this is where I want to raise my family, this is where I want to spend my time, is really important.
Yeah. So, cognizant of the time that we've got left up here, and I think we want to take some audience questions too, but obviously your competitors in the market right now have started to make changes based upon what's happening with the federal tax credits, tariffs, and everything else in a very disruptive environment. A lot of people pivoting back to hybrids or changing. What's your outlook? What's this impact of the tax credits and just the general feeling in Washington right now?
Well, yeah.
Sorry, that might have been a loaded one for you.
That's an easy question. We'll end on that in 30 seconds. Well, I guess just for the benefit of the group, there was a tax credit in place as part of the IRA program that provided $7,500 tax rebate at the time of purchase for an electric vehicle, provided you were under an income threshold and provided the vehicle price was under a price threshold. That ended at the end of September. And so not surprisingly, we saw a lot of demand get pulled from October, maybe even the early parts of November. People that were thinking about buying a car pull into September. Sort of obvious. If you're going to buy an electric car, you should have bought it before September 30th. And so there's a short-term impact from that, but I do think in the fullness of time, it doesn't change any of the outcomes, and in some ways it simplifies. I don't necessarily, without commenting on whether I think it's good or bad for the U.S. auto industry, I would say in the long term, or medium to long term, it actually simplifies things for Rivian, in that in addition to that tax credit, there were a number of requirements that manufacturers get to a certain percentage of zero-emission vehicles. And companies that made only EVs, like us or Tesla, would generate a lot of excess of these credits, and we'd sell them. 100% margin credit sales. And so in our case, we would sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of credits. In Tesla's case, they'd sell billions of dollars worth of credits. That drove a lot of, call it unnatural behavior. And the most explicit example of that is if you saw an electric vehicle from another manufacturer with a lease rate of like $39 a month. It was really disruptive to the marketplace because it would drive consumers to behave in irrational ways or expect irrational things. But that wasn't the company making money. That was the company making a decision to say, we have a product that's EV, that's an electric vehicle. It's not very desirable. It's not selling very well. So we can either not sell that and have all these fixed costs that are lost, or we can essentially give it away as a way to earn a credit and not have to go generate the credit by buying it from Rivian or Tesla. But it was a weird dynamic to be selling Rivians and then be like, well, did you see that thing from that company you could buy for $49 a month? And so that's all going to go away. And so what I think you're going to have, as you are witnessing it, you're going to see a lot of manufacturers step back pretty aggressively from electrification. I happen to think that's actually a bad thing for the health of the U.S. auto industry and for the health of U.S. technology. But narrowly and myopically through the lens of Rivian, it actually creates less competition. But I say this all the time. I think every manufacturer needs to be developing world-class leading technology in what is undeniably the future state of this industry. And throttling back right now will make it extremely hard for those companies to participate in the 2030s. And if you look at the competition that's coming from particularly China, these companies are not throttling back. And so I think it's really important that Rivian's successful. I think it's really important that Tesla continues to be successful. I also think it's important that we have other U.S. and Western manufacturers that are on the front edge or leading edge. And so in support of that, the deal that we did with Volkswagen, I'm really excited about, because of course, it's a great deal for Rivian from a financial point of view, but from a mission point of view and from a customer choice point of view, effectively creating more choices for customers, it provides access to a whole host of brands that occupy different brand positions than Rivian. So that's Porsche, that's Audi, that's Volkswagen as a brand. And so I think there's going to be more deals like that in the industry as certain companies decide to divest from tech, and will ultimately still need to have that technology in the future. But I'm actually surprised at how fast some of the companies have turned off future technology programs and gone back to historical programs. I think in the short term, certainly it's going to be positive for cash flow. In the long term, I think it's very negative for their scale.
Thank you, RJ. Kathy, you want to?
Yes, so I invite any Rotarians to come to the microphone, ask questions, and we already have someone at the microphone, so go right ahead.
Hi there. My question is about autonomous driving. So 3 things. One is, what is Rivian doing with that, and where are you headed with it? And then I'm going to ask you to make 2 predictions. When do you think will be the last time a human drives a taxi or an Uber or something for hire, a car for hire? And when do you think the last time would be when a human will own a car for exclusive use, for their own use?
That's a long question.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Taking your notes.
All right, so let's talk first on autonomy as a technology. So when I look at the future, and when we as a company look at the future, there's 3 trends that we think are on their own. They're independent. There's no technical reason they're aligned, but by coincidence, because they've come about at similar times, often they can consolidate it into one vehicle. And so that's the electrification of the auto industry. We view that as a trend that has an asymptote of 100%. the move towards software-defined architectures, and I think that's self-evident, but it's the number of vehicles that won't have deeply integrated software, and for that matter, AI into their ecosystem will be very small. And then lastly is autonomy. And so we think the future is electric, autonomous, and connected. And because of that, by far, our biggest investment area is autonomy. And this is a long question, and we could spend the next hour on this, but I'm going to try to do it in 2 minutes. 2 minutes to describe the technology. So autonomy has been a topic that's been looked at since like the early 2010, 2011 timeframe. And up through 2021, the way that autonomous systems were developed, everything, whether it was a Waymo, Tesla, even what Rivian launched with, let's broadly characterize that as AV1, Autonomous Vehicle 1.0. And the way these systems were designed, and this was before we discovered and developed modern transformer approaches, but they were designed as essentially you'd have a perception platform. So depending on the vehicle, if it was a personally owned vehicle, it'd have mostly cameras. If it was something like a future robotaxi, have cameras plus LiDAR plus radar. But a perception platform that would identify all the objects in a scene. So that's like people, bikes, cars, trucks, buildings. It would classify those objects, as I just quickly did there, and then it would associate a vector with each of those objects. So acceleration and velocity in X, Y, and Z for all those objects. And so that perception platform would have this stream of objects being fed into what was called a planner. And the planner was a human-written description, so it was code, software that tried to describe the rules of how to operate. So I'll oversimplify here to illustrate the point. That's a person, do not hit the person. That's a car, do not hit that. That's an open lane, you can drive forward. This is the speed, maintain velocity below this speed. So it was very much a rules-based environment written by hand, written by developers. And as a result, the systems took a lot of time to develop and required a tremendous amount of tuning if you went from, let's say, San Francisco to Atlanta or Atlanta to London, because the idiosyncratic differences between how you behaved on those roads need to be captured into the planner. Around 2021, this big innovation came about, which we've now experienced, all of us, in the form of LLMs, which is a completely different way of understanding the world. And the concept of now word we use all the time, which is a neural net, emerged. And the idea of building very, very large, multi-billion parameter models that would learn in a multi-dimensional latent space how something works. So LLMs have learned everything. Essentially, we trained LLMs on the internet. Everything that the internet knew, an LLM now knows. Or anything that was written in a book, an LLM will know. And we didn't do that by huge teams of programmers writing down a bunch of if-then statements to say, like, if someone asks about diabetes, this is what it is. We did it by defining a way to ingest information in the way that our human brain does into this multidimensional neural net that defines it defines intelligence as we know it today. And so that approach that we saw unfold in front of our own eyes, for those that were like early adopters, like ChatGPT 2 to ChatGPT 3 to the big one that everybody remembers is ChatGPT 4. That same complete technology revolution happened in autonomous vehicles, where AV 2.0, which started in like 2021, does not have a planner. It doesn't have a set of rules that are written by a human. In fact, it's built on what we now call an end-to-end model. So you have a model that's accumulating lots and lots of data, and that data that's coming in is being triggered and identified and then used to teach a multi-billion parameter model as to how to drive, in much the same way that you would teach a 16-year-old to drive. And in order for that to work, you need complete control of your perception stack. So you can't have third parties that act as abstraction layers in your camera stack or in your LiDAR or your radar. You need a lot of inference capability to collect the data and then move the data into the cloud. And then once it's in the cloud, you need, as everyone here knows, a lot of GPUs to train the model. And that model is then trained. You create this big model, many billions of parameters, and then you distill it back down. You run it in the vehicle. And the reason I described that, I know that I took more than my 2 minutes, I'm sorry, it's a complex topic, is we're at like such an early stage of that new model deploying. And you see those Waymos in the city today. These are running, I know the guy who built the model, these are running on a foundation model that generalizes very quickly. And so if you look at what Waymo did from 2015 to 2021, it took forever to just add individual roads in San Francisco. They're now appearing in cities because the ability to learn has been generalized. And so we recognized this shift was coming. What Rivian launched in 2021 was an AV 1.0 solution. So it was a complete throwaway platform. And we started working in 2021 on our next gen system, which we launched the hardware on last year. And so we developed all the cameras, a radar platform, and a compute platform, and started quickly accumulating data from that fleet. So if you have a Gen 2 vehicle, thank you, because you're helping to train our model. If you have a Gen 1 vehicle, I'm sorry your features aren't getting better, but buy a Gen 2. But the Gen 2 vehicles are part of this fleet, and so we have a big autonomy day we're going to host in about a month, and we're going to pull the curtain back on everything to show just what the potential is. But there's only a handful of companies that have vertically integrated perception platforms with the ability to accumulate a lot of data. So of course Tesla's the biggest. They have a more constrained sensor set. They're camera only for reasons we can spend more time on, but I would say I disagree with. But it's secondary to the fact that it's a neural net based approach. Waymo had to pivot mid-flight to a neural net based approach. They have a teeny fleet. As many as you see, there's only a few thousand cars in their fleet. And we have what is actually the second biggest fleet in the United States for data acquisition, with by far and away the best sensor set. So we have 55 megapixels of cameras in every Gen 2 R1 that's on the road. That's about double the next closest. Those are coupled with the only 3D imaging radar in the front. And so we're building a brain on how to drive. And the question of robotaxi versus personally owned, which was the last question you said, like how soon do I think all taxis will be provided through autonomy? I think that's going to happen quicker than we think. And we have a few markets to prove that. I'm sure you're probably beginning to see it here. But in San Francisco, which was ground zero for this development, today 2/3 of the ride shares in San Francisco proper are provided autonomously. And if anybody's been in a Waymo, you quickly realize you much prefer it over a human driver because you don't have to worry about somebody listening. Maybe there's maybe something else is listening, but at least it's not as personal. I'm kidding. Waymo does not have any mics listening to you. It's just a joke. We think, but you have the privacy. You don't feel obligated to have a conversation, and so if you look at the survey business, it is overwhelmingly in favor of autonomy as a rideshare provider versus a human. And so I think that will happen over the next more than 5, less than 10 years. You'll see essentially everything shift entirely to autonomy. Now the second question, which I embedded in the question, I actually disagree with some of it, and I'll explain why. The question was, when do we think the last owned vehicle will be out there? Meaning, assuming everybody moves to rideshare. And just to give some statistics, so today, around 99% of the miles driven in the United States, which is over 10 trillion miles a year, over 99% of those are in things that we own. Meaning, around 1% is the aggregate summation of rideshare, taxi, rental car, shared vehicle. And I used to think that autonomous robotaxis would make up a lot more. I used to think half the country will just stop owning a car and move entirely to rideshare. I do think that will grow, but I think the predominant method of consuming miles in our country is going to be in things that we own, frankly, because we're such a wealthy country. And so think of it from all of your perspectives and that of your friends' perspectives. If you have the choice to buy something for $30,000 or $40,000 and have it be yours, meaning your car seat stays in it, your gym bag stays in the back, it's always in your driveway, you don't have to worry about it smelling when you get into it, it's just yours. I think most people are going to still say yes to that. Now, it could completely drive itself. It could go pick your kids up from school without you in it. It could take your son to basketball practice without you in it. But I think we're going to see a very high level of personally owned, fully autonomous vehicles. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe it goes from less than 1% to 50% of rideshare. Maybe it goes less than 1% to 10%. But regardless of what the consumption model becomes, the technology is the same. The car has to be capable of driving itself empty, meaning without a person in the driver's seat. And that is going to happen. That's not some science fiction that I'll see when I'm 90 years old. That's something we're going to see in the next decade. And I guess I'll finish my long answer to this question with one thing, which is the rate of progress that we've seen in autonomy and technology in vehicles over the last 10 years. So if we look back and look at where we were in 2015, or even make it the last 20 years, look back to where we were in 25, and imagine what the next 10 to 20 years are going to be, the slope of change of that curve, I would characterize as being many orders of magnitude sharper than what we just witnessed for the last 10 to 20 years, many orders of magnitude sharper. And of course, it's underpinning that is some big technical innovations that are hard to fully appreciate, but they're going to change everything about how we think about the car. And that's, of course, transformer-based encoding and a lot of the AI innovations that we saw come out of academia in the last just a couple of years. I mean, that's what's so cool. It's like a few years old. Transformers are a few years old. So, my goodness, imagine what the next 20 years look like.
I'm going to scrap my question to keep us on time, but I have to make an observation to my friends here, which is tell your kids to be entrepreneurs, not professors, even though, as you said, great things come out of academia, because you and I have two things in common and one thing not in common. We're both tall, we both have MIT PhDs, but I became a professor because way to business school at Emory. Professors get zero equity. I have no equity. You led the largest IPO in at least 10 years, and you lead a company with an $18 billion market cap. So if I was coming out of MIT at age 26, and if I had your talent, I would have followed you. So thanks for this talk.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic program. I was checking out the R2, so if I buy one, I'll let you know, but there will be no tattoo. Sorry, there will be no tattoo. So thank you very much. Next week, no program, no Rotary, because we are celebrating Thanksgiving. After that, December 1st, we have several guests, and the theme is on mental health, the mental health crisis in young people, so not one to be missed. December 8th, we have Brian Blake, president of Georgia State University, to talk about Georgia State as an economic catalyst. And then December 15th, we are celebrating Rotarian Daughter Day with guest speaker Blaine Alexander, that was her husband. And I'll tell you did that, so you get some credit. And she's a Dateline correspondent. So thank you very much. We'll see you on December 1st. We are adjourned.